welcome to Inspiring Heartfelt Conversations. My name is Barbara Morningstar. This series is hosted by Inaudi's COCOON, which offers education on a range of end-of-life topics in the form of talks, workshops, and courses. My guest today is Dr. Joshua Black, who is one of the world's leading academic experts on grief dreams. He is a grief researcher, speaker, consultant, and host of the Grief Dreams podcast. Welcome.
Well, thank you for having me, Barbara.
It's great to see you. And I was just saying, you've just moved to the Vancouver, British Columbia area, so you're in our little cluster now. So that's exciting that you're on the West Coast now. Very, very wonderful to have you here.
I'm loving it here so far, and it's beautiful. And it's great to be able to see you again, because you came on our podcast probably in the beginning. I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. So it's nice that we get to reconnect.
Exactly. And speaking of that, we initially connected when I was the program director at a hospice, and you were doing your master's degree in initial research because we had clinical counselors on staff, and
Right.
you were reaching out to see if you could, find individuals who are open to sharing some of their dreams.
I remember that. It was a beautiful moment for me, for you to actually value the topic, because a lot of people that I approached to help out with the study didn't understand the value of it. But you understood it right away, which was really heartfelt for me. And we've been in contact really ever since. And that's almost 10 years ago. So It's just amazing that now I feel a lot has changed just in the research by the time when we first met to where it is now in all areas.
Well, Dr. Karen Wyatt and I, as you know, are active dreamers. So this is a really passionate subject for me too. I've been blessed with rich dreams throughout my life. And so I have a deep respect for the landscape of dreams. They can be rich, but they're deeply vulnerable and profoundly personal too. So today we get to celebrate the importance of that and the beauty of it as well together. So let's start. And I know you've done this with other people in interviews. There always tends to be a turning point with people where, not always, but a turning point in people's lives that change the direction. So let's start with that tender moment with your father's death. Can you elaborate on how that impacted your life?
I think, when it comes to understanding grief, that was a turning point. But when it comes to understanding dreams, it actually came probably about 4 years prior. And so I'm not sure where you want to go with that, but I could start with the dreams and lead to the grief if you want.
Well, let's start about the dream itself, because that's really the theme of this interview or conversation, and profound in how it touched your life, right?
Yeah, well, the biggest thing, with that was, I just started valuing dreams in a certain way because I was told that, dreams were meaningless all my life. And if they were negative, it was from the devil. So for me, I had to sort of learn outside. Almost the dreams taught me that they were valuable. Like no one else outside me was telling me they were valuable. And so when my dad died, it was such a hard time for me. And I wasn't thinking or even expecting to have a dream. It wasn't something that wasn't talked about around me. And so, when it came to my loss, I didn't know what grief was. I was really young. I was still in my undergrad at school. And my goal was to be an elementary school teacher. And I was on track for that. But his death and the timing of his death was actually probably the biggest point, because if he died any later, I would have been an elementary school teacher. And so when he died was so impactful, because I started thinking more critically about grief and how we process that. I did a poor job of processing it, to tell you the truth. Like when I heard that he died, he was supposed to take me out for my birthday, and he just never showed up. And then I got a call a couple of days later that he was actually dead. And the emotion that I had was so scary for me, especially as a male, because I started crying, and I don't know the last time I cried, to tell you the truth, maybe as a kid. And so I couldn't hold back. I couldn't stop it. I'm so used to avoiding my feelings in many ways. And so it just came out, and like I just had to allow it to come out, which was, for me, I had to hold that. And I'm still learning how to hold tears in many ways, right? But I'm realizing that it's valued. Like you have to value those emotions. But then when I went back to school after the funeral, what happened was all of the emotions, all that sadness went away, which was my goal, right? Like when you're grieving, the goal is to get out of that space in many ways. And so, but what happened was I wasn't sad, but I wasn't happy either. So one would say I would probably be depressed because the color came out of my world. And I just thought, oh, this is just life now. This is what happens after. And I wasn't trying to seek help. I didn't feel like, oh, I'm in a bad place because I'm still getting good grades. I'm going to work. I'm maintaining my life. And no one's asking about my grief or anything. But I'm like, this is just how it is, I guess. And so it went about 3 months like that. We were just, you're living in this great world. And then I had this dream. And that's what I'm saying. I wasn't asking for it. It just happened. And that would be the changing point of realizing these dreams are actually occur and they're actually very valuable for someone in the grieving process. So in the dream I was in my room and I saw my dad at the other end of my room looking through some of my stuff. Because at that time I had a lot of clutter in my bedroom. And so I had like knickknacks everywhere. And I got that from him in many ways. Like he's the type of person who would go out on garbage day and look through people's stuff and like try to like, bring things home. And the house was very cluttered in many ways. It wasn't like a hoarder like that extreme, but there was a lot of stuff. And so he was enjoying looking through some of the stuff I had in my room, which I think is very characteristic of him as an individual. Anyways, so I looked at him and I started walking up to him and he turned around and he looked so light. Like he has a lot of trauma. He didn't know how to process his emotions in waking life. He was very angry in many ways, and he drank a lot to deal with his emotions. So, for me to see, so always felt heavy in life is the best way to put it. But in the dream, he felt very light. So it was probably the healthiest I've ever seen him in any way. And he was wearing this, it's so funny. No one really asked me, but I'm going to tell you. He was wearing like the clothes. I never really talked about the clothes he wears, but he was wearing this like really like roughed up, Labatt blue kind of t-shirt, like this beer t-shirt that you'd find in a beer case. And he would always wear those, right? Because I think he drank so much, but he also enjoyed getting free clothes. So it also represented that, how I sort of saw him in many ways. So he wasn't in like a white robe and all this sort of like light shining from him. He had like jeans on and this beat up t-shirt. So anyways, I went up to him and I said, I'm going to miss you, acknowledging that he was dead. And I said that I loved him. And we hugged. And then I woke up. And the crazy thing was when I woke up, the color was back into my life. Mm-hmm. And I didn't interpret the dream. I woke up like that. And I sat at the edge of my bed for like 30 minutes wondering, what was that? Because it changed me. And I could feel inside it changed me. And it had nothing to do with how I saw the dream. Like to this day, I don't say, oh, it was a visitation or this was a communication from him. I marvel in the fact that experience changed me and allowed me to start processing my emotions. It gave me the boost I needed to then I started smiling. I started feeling joy again. And I could also feel the sadness again too. So it got me out of a place that I didn't even know I was stuck. And then from there I had, dreams, moving forward about every 3 months or so. And, that has diminished over the years. But that first one, so like I can still remember the feeling because it definitely changed me. And I don't know if I would have got out of that to the extent any other way. It was phenomenal.
And so that led you to the path of saying, is anyone else acknowledging these? Is that what occurred?
No, funny story is I didn't tell anyone about the experience. So for me, it was so personal. And I'm still trying to understand the value of these dreams and stuff. But I just thought it changed me, and I went back to what my goal and that was to be an elementary school teacher. And so when I got into the interview to go to the school, I turned it down because there's something in me that felt it wasn't right. And it was a very scary decision for me because my whole life was led to that goal. I didn't have a plan B. So for me to turn it down was very scary. I didn't know why. It just didn't feel right. And so I went through a state there where I just didn't know what I wanted to do in life anymore. And within that 1 year, I started volunteering with the brief because I felt like, I volunteered a lot with kids because I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. But I'm like, what else can I do to volunteer? And I'm like, well, maybe I could do something with the grief and make it a little more meaningful to me. And so when I started, volunteering, people started bringing up the dreams that they had in group and also one-on-one on why they didn't have these dreams, how come they're having negative dreams, stuff like that. And that's when I went to the research to sort of see what can I give them to help them. Because I still I got an honors BA in psychology, so I knew how to find research. So when I looked, there just wasn't anything there for them. And then that was the moment where I thought, oh, it's a very interesting topic. And they seem very distressed that they don't have an answer. And they're really making up a lot of negative reasons to why it exists. So like some people would say that they're not having dreams because the person didn't cross over if they're religious, or that they just don't love them anymore. So like really like negative things, or that they're mad at them. I'm like, that can't be. I'm like, that seems kind of like like there's got to be some kind of other reason for that. And that's when I sort of said, like, okay, like maybe I could do this. I wasn't planning to be a researcher, and it took me a lot of courage to actually say, you know what, I'm going to try this and see how far I can get. And I got a PhD, which is I think is amazing anyways, because all my colleagues, they wanted to be researchers, like for the most part. And for me, it was a huge learning curve in my master's and PhD. But, with the right supervisors and the people around that were supporting me to say that this topic was valuable, it really gave me what I needed to finish, because it wasn't an easy journey, to say the least. But the research is out, and I'm just really happy that I was able to give answers to the people who wanted them back, like 10 years ago when I started.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to applaud your courage on that, because it is a really important topic, but can also be a bit taboo and a little bit out there for people. So good on you that you've done this, because we'll all benefit from it, right? And just we talked about this before we started, across the board, dreams and deathbed visions are being acknowledged in many arenas now in a way that is helping not just the individual in the process, but the people around them and the staff that work with individuals too. So let's just go into the whole big question is, why do you think some people have dreams and others don't? What do you see in the research with the dreamers, the ones that have the dreams?
That was the big question, right? Because I wanted to try to give a scientific explanation to help people understand that maybe there's something else. Maybe it's a personality trait, like maybe it's your attachment, maybe it's openness to experience, something like that. Maybe it's, age, gender. So I looked at that. I looked at grief. So maybe it's your grief. So a lot of people thought that, maybe the more you're, I guess, in deep sorrow, maybe the more likely you have these experiences. Because there is a myth that says if you're dreaming of the deceased, it means you're, quote unquote, not over the loss, which whatever that means. But there's that tie to, it's linked to grief. So I looked at that. And spirituality, people thought that maybe only spiritual people have these experiences, right? It's very interesting. And so we looked at all of that. And then looked at your dream recall in general. Like, and maybe just people who remember more dreams will have more of these types of dreams. And so when we looked at everything, what we found was, across different samples. So I looked at it with skeletal loss and also with pet loss. And what we found is the main predictor is dream recall in general. So people who remember more dreams in general will remember more of these types of dreams. And I think that's so interesting, because what it's saying to me is that people are probably dreaming of the deceased more than they're actually remembering it. So it's just a memory issue more than anything. And when you ask those people, what I like about it is that that understanding can help people so much when they don't have a dream. Because when you ask people that don't have a dream, most of the time they'll say, like when you ask them about their just dreams in general, most of them will say they don't remember their dreams that often. And then I get to sort of connect the dots for them. And I say, well, then how are you supposed to remember one of these types of dreams? And they're like, oh, okay, interesting. So like all that weight that they were putting on them for all these like ideas, it goes away because interesting. And then the question sometimes comes up, how do I remember more dreams? And that is a very interesting question. The research has been, shown that if you value dreams, well, you start to remember more of them. It's pretty straightforward. And it's nice how they're flexible in that way. And so writing a dream journal can be very helpful, and talking about it, listening to this podcast may even help people understand the value of them. But it's just our culture really diminishes the value of dreams. The first time I even heard about dream research was in like third year of my psychology class at Brock University. And like some people don't even have that because it was in a sleep class, and not every university has a sleep class. So, a lot of people go throughout their life never actually understanding that there's value to dreams. And so, the mind just says, why remember them?
Mm-hmm. So in the ones that actually they're more active dreamers in general? Are they more open? Was it the intensity of the grief? I mean, can you elaborate on the people that did actually have the higher number of dreams? Did you notice a pattern in some of the things that came forward?
So there is an indirect pattern. So there's those people who had a high openness to experience. What's interesting is that indirectly sort of helped people dream in general more. So that's kind of interesting. So, and then the other thing was attachment, also predicted indirectly. And then also the bigger one was spirituality actually didn't have an impact, which I thought was really interesting. And, for me, I think that was a bigger clue because a lot of people were saying that it was only a certain subsect of the population was having these dreams. And this is telling me, no, everyone is having these dreams. It doesn't matter if you're spiritual or not. So this is a human condition. This isn't based on a belief system. The belief structure changes the pattern of the dreams on maybe what they say or the imagery in the background. But the dream itself, everyone's having them in one way or another. Mm-hmm. If you're remembering your dreams. And there is 10% of the population that doesn't recall dreams in general. So they would probably never have one of these experiences. And so, for me, like looking at that, I'm like, you know what, this is a human condition. Mm-hmm. And you sort of see that at end of life too. Like people are experiencing these very common dreams or visions at end of life. And I'm like, wow, they're having this too. And they're also having these, I would say, visions also. Which are called these externalized continuing bonds experiences too, which is just very interesting in itself, but I don't know how much you want to go into that. But yeah, so.
Well, we can touch on the bonds a bit later, but I just want to, because I actually sat with a friend who's in the industry who had a tragic death of her son a couple of years ago. And I was mentioning that we were going to be doing this conversation, and she had not yet had a dream with him. But then she went on to explain this amazing dream her friend had. And I'm an active dreamer. It just pours at me when things open. So much of my life has been guided through my dreams. And I remember at my husband's funeral saying, if you're not a dreamer in the group, stay open to the ones who are. And so when my husband died, I had so many things with him. I kept a separate journal. And I remember when you asked me to come on the podcast, I thought, okay, I'll just go through the year-long dream journal I kept with him after he died in preparation for our conversation. What was fascinating about that, in the dream journal, I didn't just keep my dreams. Every time someone came up to me and gave me the gift of their dream, I wrote it down. And when I went back through it, I went, whoa, some of those are even better than mine, And I remember thinking, who tells anybody? Yeah. We're all in this together, right? So the active dreamers and the not so active can partner together sometimes, I think, to celebrate it in unique ways.
I think it's very true. And one of the things I've heard from a lot of people is they don't share their dreams with others because they don't want other people to get jealous within family structures and stuff. And I think that is, a sad thing because some of these dreams can actually be very beneficial for other people to hear and to know. And, and we can be excited for other people, and we can take a lot of the wisdom in these dreams and apply it to our own grief in many ways. And I think, there is something special about that. But yeah, when I hear these dreams from other people that, will sometimes be about someone they don't really even know. So like maybe an acquaintance or something, they'll have a dream of that deceased, asking them to share a message of some sort to the other person. I think that is really fascinating because it's helping, so someone else's dream is directly trying to get them to help someone else. So it's almost like the compassionate communities thing where it's like you're trying to help someone else. It's basically through a dream that's allowing you to do that. And the stories I've heard, it's always been a positive experience. And the person hasn't had a dream on the other end. So it's very interesting as you're saying that, maybe when you don't have a dream, someone else may for you, or may just have a dream that you can take and hold as your own and learn from as you work through this, process of grief.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I, when I read your research, I went back and I thought about there's times like with my husband, it was a more challenging death, or a friend I lost was to suicide. Those were really intense dream memories. And then others where I didn't have as direct a bond, or the death wasn't as challenging, the nature of the death, maybe not even a dream, or not as many, right? And
Yeah.
so that was interesting to observe too. And you have that woven into the research about the intensity of the grief, or the nature of the loss having an effect on it too.
Yeah, and you'd think so, like, because like the losses I was looking at, they were pretty like a partner, spouse. It's something that you would think would be very significant in many ways. And then there's prenatal loss and also pet loss, and so you'd think those would be a little more important than maybe like a acquaintance that you didn't really know. So a lot of my research focused on more of that significant loss type, and that's sort of what you're saying, is that maybe that is a thing. Like maybe the more bonded you are to the individual, maybe that has some type of impact. But when we look at grief, so I looked at grief, and grief only had an indirect approach to dreaming of the deceased, and that is just increased dream recall. So it didn't actually, the grief itself didn't actually impact dreaming of the deceased directly. It was indirectly, because one of the things that happens in grief, this is my theory anyways, is when you're grieving, you can have more vivid images in your mind, but you also wake up more frequently because of your distress. And so you'll have, this sporadic sleep, and that in itself actually increases your dream recall, because you're waking up more often and you'll be able to catch a dream more often. So research has shown the more you wake up, during the night, the more likely you're going to remember a dream. And so, that could be that link there. We still need to like piece that apart more. But yeah, so grief doesn't seem to have that direct link. So it may not be that. It's just interesting. I said there's a lot more to learn on it, but the research that started, I think, has helped normalizing the experience. And that, for me, that was the most important thing, because people weren't sharing it, and a lot of people didn't understand that these were a thing. So for people to now realize that, wait a second, like you can actually research this stuff in a very non-judgmental way, to provide people an opportunity to say, like, oh, their experiences are normal, the positive dreams, which we're talking about a lot, but also the negative dreams that people can have.
Well, and I just think it's interesting too, when you spoke of your father's dream, you had no expectation of a dream.
No.
And I watched people put pressure on themselves with an expectation of the dream, and I sense that that's sometimes can push it away almost, right?
It could be, right? And it's one of those things that you just need more research on. But maybe, I know denying the death being real, I've seen that kind of pushed away even remembering a dream. And I think that, I don't know if it stops the dream being created, but remembering the dream is almost a different thing that we still need to know more about just through research. But that can also be a thing, right? So maybe they're dreaming, but why aren't they remembering that? Because it's really interesting what dreams we remember and when we remember them.
Well, I was even thinking, when I did the podcast with you, my mother had just died, and she had had Alzheimer's a form of Alzheimer's for over 12 years, and at a distance in Canada. So already I'd grieved a lot, and I did go to the funeral. But you say at the end, who would you like to have a dream with? And I said, my mom, because I haven't seen her yet. So then I'm sort of waiting for mom, because these other deaths, I'm like getting bombarded, and then there's nothing. Like, where are you, mom? And so I'm waiting and waiting. And then I finally thought, maybe you just don't need to have that. And then I had a fascinating experience. I need to share this with you, because you kind of set it up for me. I'm in the interior of BC, and I've been invited to do a day-long workshop to hospices and people in the palliative care industry. And it's on honoring the mystery, the theme of my book, and another bit of the caregiver. And so it's really dim in the room. There's a huge PowerPoint screen behind me. Everyone's focused on the mystery of life. And I get to the part about how, as people get near end of life, sometimes their language changes. It becomes more metaphoric and poetic. And so I'm sharing that with them, with the mic, the dim lights, and then I just get this nudge, and I just look at the audience and say, and for those of you who don't think that you can speak to people or connect with people with dementia or Alzheimer's, I want you to know that is clearly not the truth. And then I said, my mother's language changed with it, and we flowed with her metaphors. We didn't put a literal thing on her. We just flowed with it and shared music with her, and the connection and the love. And it was so beautiful. And as soon as I said that, bam, this light comes on overhead, spotlight comes on, blinding from the ceiling on me, and I can't even look up. Like, I just can't even look up. Like, and the woman who's doing the sound thing at the back yells out, I didn't touch anything. I didn't touch anything. And I thought, wow, like in this moment, I'm honoring that if you move past the literal, and I'm honoring the beauty and the love we felt with her. And bam, this light comes on. It took her like 5 minutes to find out how to turn off. I'm like, I can't even see. And then I look at everybody and go, I guess Mom really liked that point. But in that moment, I felt this wave of love coming over me. Like, other people need to hear this. And thank you for the gift of what you did with me. You know, it was beautiful. And then when they were all talking, I went back to the woman and she went, honest to goodness, right in front of me are the switches. That one was over there and I didn't touch it. Wow. So I had dreams with her later, but you know, it was when I let go of the expectation of a nightly dream.
Right.
This kind of magical moment happened, right?
Well, I think there's a lot. And like, you don't have to be spiritual to have those magical moments. It's just appreciating them when they come. And like, we don't need to understand everything to appreciate it. Like, I don't understand how a tree grows, you know, like I know water, sun signs, and soil, but at the end of the day, there's so much going on. I don't know how my body works, you know, like, but I'm here, but I can appreciate that. And these dreams is another thing. And these other experiences that the bereaved have that really help them in many ways work through and to feel loved, as you said. And like how beautiful that is, because it's so hard to feel loved in this world that we live in. And if these experiences can help us, I think that's a huge thing we need to look at more, because there's something there that is like a gem that we just haven't really considered on what it's doing and why are so many people having them. Like, we're not researching them, even though they're a big part of the human condition. Like, why is that? And I think because a lot of people are afraid to share them, thinking that they're going to be judged or put into a category and say that, oh, this is because it's, you know, it's a religious sort of connotation. But if everyone's having these in many ways, you know, like, what is actually going on here? And I think this is sort of the mystery, as you talk about too in your book. It's just like, you know, we don't fully understand this stuff, but it's occurring. And how beautiful it is when we can just look at it without judgment and just see the effect it's having on people.
So just to stay open and be curious, right? Because it really is beyond the definable in many ways. So let's move into nightmares and the harder dreams. Can you speak to people who may have nightmares after a death with somebody and sort of the expression that those come in?
Yeah, so I think people need to understand that, like, a little bit about just dreams in general. So dreams represent our waking life, and research has shown that. So when you're, you know, sad and depressed, you're going to have more negative dreams. When you're happy and joyful, you're going to have more positive dreams. On average, most people have negative dreams, and that's just because of our current state, going to bed, our worries, our fears, also what we watch. The news is a big one, or, you know, horror movie, all that stuff will jump into our dreams. And so after trauma, what they've also found is that your dreams become even more consistently negative. So when you look at grief, one would expect you should have more negative dreams of the deceased. That's what I went in with. That's what I thought. But what's really interesting is not actually true. You actually have more positive dreams of the deceased, which goes against the current research. So there's something special going on with these types of dreams that we just don't know much about. But so, you know, in sort of a couple samples, like, so the spousal and pet loss, around 90% of people who had a dream of deceased had a positive experience with that dream. When it comes to negative, it was around, you know, the one study was 40%, the other one was around 20% had a negative dream. So negative dreams are still common. And so, but it's the positive dreams that seem to be even more common. So then the question is, what is going on with these negative dreams and what are they related to? And in my research, these distressing dreams are related to trauma. And you can really see that with, you know, people dreaming of reliving the death again, or feeling helpless to try to save someone and they can't, like they're stuck in the mud, or maybe the person is dying again in a different way than they normally did. And that you sort of see that within PTSD too, those trauma dreams. But then you also have these other dreams where the deceased is criticizing people, and causing shame or guilt. And so that is another place where guilt is coming through. And so I think a lot of people can learn, negative dreams, as much as they can hinder us in many ways, because a lot of people who have these negative dreams will be afraid to go to bed. And we know how important sleep is just for the human condition and to process our world, but it's even more important when we're grieving. And so they'll restrict their sleep because they're afraid of having this experience. But there's actually a lot of beauty in these negative dreams, because if you know how to look at them, they're trying to tell you something that is going on in your waking life. And they're very metaphoric, which can be very difficult. And because we don't talk about dreams, they tend to be very difficult to really understand. But at the end of the day, there are pieces in there that can really help you or your therapist to really understand what your mind is trying to work through. And if you understand what your mind's working through, you can help it out when you're awake. And then it can sort of process. And what's interesting is majority of people who had a negative dream experience also reported having a positive one. So I think what is going on there is people have more negative dreams in the beginning of their loss, but then as they start processing that, they'll have more of these positive dreams as they move forward.
So a nightmare could be truly, if held in a different light, an invitation to healing if it's held in a different way.
That's right. It's all about perspective. What do you feel? A lot of people will say, this is sad, but a lot of people who believe dreams are visitations, let's say, will also take these negative dreams as visitations. And so it's actually a haunting to the person. So anytime we work with someone, we have to understand their belief structure to understand, why it's distressing to them. And, with that, you can sort of piece apart a little bit about, teaching them about dreams in general, because we have to use discernment when we look at these dreams, because if we don't, we could really sabotage where we can go with that dream. And there's different cultures have different ways of working with negative dreams, even if they do call it a haunting. But sometimes it's like, providing merit or some type of ritual to try to, alleviate the distress of the soul, quote unquote, that's crossed over. That's like looking for something in waking life. But for the most part, you can really look at those dreams, especially in Western culture, and say, okay, how is this relating to your grief in some way? And it's pretty straightforward. When I look at these dreams, in many ways, it really connects pretty easily, just because there's not many ways you can go in grief. Pretty well the stuff you're dealing with, and there's, usually typical things that people work through. And a lot of the stuff that is mentioned in the dream is probably something that you should work through. So an example of this would be, I remember I had this individual who shared this dream where it was her husband that came to the door, her deceased husband came to the door, and she was so surprised to see him. And he's like, oh, I've actually never really died. I've been somewhere else, but I want to get back into a relationship with you again. And she said, well, I'm dating someone else. I can't. You're such a horrible, mean person to do something like this to me. And then he said, well, if you're not going to, go back with me, well, then, maybe what you can do is just give me all the money that you inherited and I'll leave you alone. And she's like, why would you do this? And she said no. And then it became a battle where he was chasing her in many ways. And so she had this repeatedly, and she took it as a haunting. And then, when I asked the individual, was he a mean person? Because sometimes, these dreams can reflect past traumas within the relationship that you're still trying to work through in many ways. And for her, she said, no, he was a very loving and beautiful man. And I said, oh, then let's talk about this imagery then. And when you look at it, she's in a new relationship in the dream. I go, is that true? And the answer is yes. And I can't imagine how hard it is to love two people at the same time. Because in our culture, it's what we do is we love one person, and then when we break up, we close our heart to that person, then we love someone new. But here, when someone dies, you're loving two people, and it's very difficult for that. How do you start a new relationship with someone when you still have this love and you still have this grief that you're working through? And sometimes the individual doesn't want you to support you in your grief. So they may say, take down the pictures. I don't want to see his photo. There's a lot of things that can go on. It's a very interesting process that the bereaved have to go through when trying to date again. But also you see this money that's part of the imagery. And then when you ask her about the money, what she says is that was the hardest thing that she's still dealing with after the death. she thought it was so unjust that he had to die for her to receive this money. And so when you look at that dream, at first she thought it was, okay, it's this haunting. But when you look at it, you see the mind's trying to process two things, which is, still holding on to this money, which she's probably using for the new relationship, and being in a new relationship. So this is something you would then talk about with your therapist or whoever you work with grief support. And that's what the mind is trying to work through, because that is also because it's trying to work with you in your sleep, it's affecting your waking life in many ways. And a lot of times we think we're better than we actually are, is the best way to put it. It's not, also the reverse is true. Sometimes we don't think we're as far as we are. But a lot of these negative dreams really showcase something that a lot of times we're avoiding. And I always like to say, like, dreams can be your best friend. They can tell you the truth when no one else will. And so it's really just looking at it at that angle can really help people as they move forward and try to understand their emotions.
Well, sometimes they put on a big social face, right? But then that doesn't fly in the dream state. Like, you go to bed and it's all there. I think it's sometimes why people too don't go as deeply into dream acknowledgement or exploration, because it is profoundly honest and intimate. And sometimes you might not want to look at what's coming up, right? So it takes a lot of courage to go into that as well, I think. So
it does. And I feel for those people, because there's not a lot of resources out there for them, just because we don't teach people about the value. And so when they do look, they go to a dream dictionary to try to get answers. And it's such a bad place to start, because they don't understand your imagery. Like it's like your grief is so unique to you. Only you know. And maybe you can have someone to help you a little bit, but no one can tell you what the dream means. And those dream dictionaries are just a waste of money. So it's one of those things that, I feel for people, because it's like, where do you it's valuable, but if you can't, connect the dots, where can you go?
Well, where can they go?
Well, they can go to me if they want.
There you go. But I'm glad. I'm glad you brought up the interpretation element, because so often the person, oh yeah, and this means this, but that as you say, your tapestry is so unique. So if someone is sharing a dream with you, there's a huge responsibility to hold space for their own individual heart and discovery about what is coming forth for them to look at and be invited in to understand or heal, right?
Yeah. I think it's just providing a safe space is the biggest thing that a lot of people have issues with. To not put their own judgments on what someone's saying. Because I hear a lot of people who have a very beautiful dream, and people will put it down and say that you're not over your loss, or that's because of medication. Like I've heard that a lot too, or that's the devil in disguise. And you're just like, wait, what? Like, no, it's a very beautiful thing that's helping the individual feel closer and to feel loved. Like, how is that something that we don't value? But then the opposite is also true. I've heard a lot of people who had these very beautiful dreams, and people will put their own religious beliefs on it. And the person's not spiritual, so what happens is they close up and they don't want to ever share that again, because it's pushing them in a place they don't want to go. And they just want to be sort of held in that space, saying, what do you believe? Like, why was that so powerful to you? How did it make you feel? That's all you need to say. And then people, it's amazing what happens because of that. Like, just an interesting story. Like, so when I meet people and they always ask, what I do and stuff, I go into that, and then I always ask them, have you ever had a dream of someone who's died? And the majority of people have. And majority of people have had a positive dream. And it's amazing when they share it, because you realize, and they tell me, this is the first time they're sharing their experience with someone. And for me, I feel so honored. But at the same time, I feel so sad that they had such a powerful experience like I had. And you just never let anyone know, because you don't want anyone to change that and how you feel. So it's a very interesting topic that, I know the work you're doing and the work of Christopher Kerr's doing at end of life is really helping that. But it's like people are still forgetting about these other dreams when we're grieving. Like, they happen more often, and more people are experiencing those to help them through these difficult times. Like, even in the pandemic, what's really interesting is, so after loss, these dreams really deal with our grief, but they don't stop. And I think that's the beauty of, so the work you're doing and the work that Christopher Kerr is doing is that, they continue on at end of life to help people, cross over and process the end of their life. But in between there, they still happen. but they happen and they talk about different things, or they focus on different things. So it could be, if you're going through a breakup, you'll have the deceased providing comfort in some way. So in the pandemic, very distressing for a lot of people having dreams that focus on those issues, where the deceased is asking them if they're okay, or providing them guidance on how to deal with or work through the conflict that is going on in their own mind. And I remember this one person came on my podcast and was sharing, he had this dream. The person died, I think it was like 30 years ago. And he was having this dream of his, one of his best friends. And he asked his best friend, are we all going to be okay? Because the pandemic just hit and everything's crazy. And then the friend said, how are you? And then the guy, Gary, said, I'm doing okay. And then his friend said, well, then I guess we're all going to be okay. And there's just so much wisdom to that, because when I look at that, I'm like, it's so true. If you're unbalanced, the world has no chance with you. But if you're like good, well, you can help so many other people maintain their balance, and we can all get through this together. And so I look at that, I'm like, how beautiful that is. So it calmed the anxiety, realizing, oh, I am okay, and I can help those who aren't, so it just, and you sort of see this throughout. So that's how beautiful these dreams are, is they really can come at these very important moments in our lives when we are feeling distressed, to help guide us to creative problem solving, but to help relieve some of the burdens that we're carrying, and to continually feel loved. Because one of the things with the isolation, it really puts a damper on how you see yourself. And a lot of these people who have these dreams just feel, even when they have a dream, they're less alone. They feel less alone. And that can help with your mental health as we move forward.
Mm-hmm. So I was going to ask you about COVID. You so beautifully embraced that, and a lot of people haven't been able to be with or see the person even when they die. So the dreams can then sometimes be richer in healing and connection, right?
Well, I think that's the beauty of these dream experiences, is that even when you can't, say, cross the border, I know some people who couldn't cross the border to be with their loved one as they died. Well, they had a dream where it relieved that guilt, or those emotions in some way. And so these dreams are helping us in many different ways. And the more we allow people to share these, the more we can actually see what's going on. Because I think we can learn a lot about grief just looking at these dreams, and how to help people when they have issues of guilt or shame or regret, on are their dreams doing? Because if we can understand that, then we can understand maybe how we can help them in waking life as we move forward.
Well, and you touched on dream journals. Do you encourage people to keep dream journals?
Well, it's one of those things. It's like, if you do, you're going to have more dreams, but you may have more. You may have more.
You're not going to get any sleep.
Well, actually, but you're going to have more negative dreams probably, because you're in distress. So I'm thinking, we haven't done the research, but I'm pretty sure that even though people are having positive dreams of the deceased, they're having negative dreams that don't have the deceased within the imagery. So it's just understanding that will be the case. But yeah, like for me, I remember doing it. Like I probably remember 3 dreams a week. The average is like 1 or 2. But when I started doing the dream journal, I was remembering, within about a couple months, I think I had 3 or 4 a night. And so I had to actually stop, and I only write down my more meaningful ones now that I want to remember, like later in the future. But also at the same time, I look at dreams, and a lot of times they're telling me stuff I already know. So it's like, it's not as valuable as when I first was starting on the journey of really trying to love myself and understand the world and my emotions more. These dreams gave me so much value because I didn't know. So they were teaching me who I was. But when you start understanding who you are, well, then they're just not as useful in time, until you have times where you're really perplexed on or you're missing something. Like I remember when the pandemic first hit, I had my first nightmare in I don't know how long, probably 5 years. And I didn't understand it because I thought I was doing so well. But in the dream, I took down the chandelier and I started eating the glass from the chandelier, and the glass was getting stuck in my throat. And I woke up just in a full sweat. And I was perplexed because I'm like, I thought I was processing this okay. What's going on? So then when I really looked at the dream, I'm like, what's a chandelier? It's all metaphorical, right? Like what's a chandelier? It's something that gives light to a room. And I'm like, what's like that? I'm like, oh, the news is like that. The news gives information to a country. And so like, oh, what am I doing when it comes to looking at the news? And I was looking at it morning, afternoon, and night. So throughout. And I didn't realize at that time, the way people write stories isn't in a cheerful or non-biased way. It's very biased. And that's how they sell more and make you click more. So I was ingesting a lot of the anxiety that the readers were writing in. And that was the stuff that was caught in my throat. And so I was becoming more imbalanced because I was reading so much. And I wasn't critically understanding what I was reading was impacting me on many levels. And so, with that dream, I was able to design a plan of what I need to feel safe, and then do it, and then let it go, and so only look at the news. I usually only look at the news usually midday or something like that, and just to sort of see, is there anything going on? But I was frantically looking because I felt like it was like life or death. And a lot of people are probably like that. But it's understanding that what we're reading is, and like what we watch, it goes into our bodies in a way, and how we see ourselves and how we see the world around us. So when it's not positive, it's like really understanding you're gonna have to check yourself, because you're in probably a state that you don't think you're in.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I respect the whole bit about the news. When I worked full-time in hospice, I actually stopped watching the news years ago, but everyone around me is watching it. So I hear about it all the time. So I find that I'm not getting that big thing setting me off, but somehow life informs me, or some little thing will come up on my phone or laptop, and it's really helpful, right? But it's healthier overall, I've found, for my own being and heart. So I think that's really quite a profound dream to share as well, because you can control that, right? So
I haven't had a nightmare since. So it's just understanding that, when that happens, utilize it as a tool and just say, oh, wow, I did not know that about myself. And I think it's like keeping in the mystery of, we're still trying to understand who we are. Like a lot of people, I think, have an understanding that they know who they are. And the reality is there's so much that's going on underneath that we have no idea, from past models and how we interact with people, everything. And I think it's just remaining in the beauty of life and including yourself in that.
Yes. And so I just want to, so let's have a couple of questions. Bonds, you talk about continuing bonds and themes. Do you want to elaborate on that? I've kind of put two big topics together, but maybe continuing bonds and how that is seen in the grief journey and the overall healing too.
So when it comes to continuing bonds, it used to be seen as a bad thing. And so these are just, a continuing bond is just, continuing a bond with the deceased loved one after they died. And so that could be, there's a couple different versions of them, but now this is sort of what we normally utilize as a way. So we'll go to a grief group, we'll talk about them, we'll do a memorial, we'll go to the tombstone or something like that, right? So these are all continuing bond experiences. And so the research has always been perplexed in many ways on how they interact, because they're tied to grief. And no one really knew is it when you do continuing bonds, you increase your grief? So is that a good thing? Or is it that when you're grieving, you turn to continuing bonds as a way of coping? And right, so you don't know the direction of that. So I really wanted to look at that, and also look at the different types of continuing bonds, because not all continuing bonds are positive. Like, so you could have, some people have a moment where they feel their loved ones talking to them or encouraging them. Other people will have a moment where their deceased is, badgering them or providing them guilt in some way, or they're feeling that they're being attacked, right? Like the haunting kind of dreams. And so when you look at, what kind of continuing bonds are out there, there's these internal ones. So it's called internalized continuing bonds. And these are ones that we sort of are deliberate, that we think about, and that they tend to be more comforting. So this would be maybe remembering moments together, sharing within a grief group of moments you have, looking at photographs, right? You're intentionally doing this stuff. And then the other one is intrusive, very intrusive. So these externalized continuing bonds, they tend to be intrusive, and they tend to be more discomforting. And that's almost like seeing the deceased would be one thing, or feeling the deceased on you, or having those negative encounters where you think the deceased is chastising you for a decision you're making in some way. And so these are just two different distinct ones. And what's interesting is that, in the research, what factors predict them are different. So trauma actually predicts these externalizing continuing bonds more often, and also attachment, a more avoidant attachment style. So, and then when it comes to these internalized ones, the ones that are more deliberate, people who don't avoid their loss, so people that have low attachment avoidance, what happens there is people, they're not deliberately avoiding. And so it makes sense how, if you're going to avoid, you're not going to be doing these internalized continuing bonds. And so your grief's going to be a little bit different. So, but that's how you utilize that to help you. But when it comes to people who are either traumatized or people who are trying to avoid their loss in many ways, it seems like there's this external presence that comes to try to help them in many ways, because they're both led to post-traumatic growth, which I think is very fascinating. So just different ways up the mountain in a way. And the theory goes, and it works with trauma. Trauma really developed this theory. But when it comes to these externalizing experiences, they can actually help with deliberate rumination. So it can help you, once you sort of have that external bond or external moment, let's say of the feeling the deceased around you in some way, you'll then maybe start thinking about them. And so it actually allows you to connect to that bond. It's almost forcing you in a way to connect. And then you'll hopefully then transition over to a more deliberate kind of continuing bond method. And then that continue on as you move forward. There has been some research that these externalizing bonds later on in life tend to be more negative in nature. They don't help with post-traumatic growth. But in the beginning of loss, it seems that there's just two different methods based on where your trauma is, if the death was traumatic, but also your attachment style. And I think that's just really amazing for us to just understand that there's just different ways we deal with that. And if we understand that, we can help them in different ways. So most people who go to a grief group, they're going to be more secure or more anxiously attached. You're not going to catch those people who have an avoidant attachment style. And it's how can we help those individuals as we move forward? So that's, what I'm really excited for, that there's more information coming out there, and also information that's saying these are very helpful. So the direction of the connection between, grief and these bonds, it can really be seen through that.
But so at the external one, is that, if somebody sees the presence or feels the presence sort of externally, can it also be a positive thing though? I mean.
Yeah. Oh yeah. It's not just because, some people may find it scary or negative. A lot of people will still find it very comforting. And it's that comfort feeling that really helps with that post-traumatic growth. It's allowing you to feel loved. It's allowing you to remember. Those are all beautiful things. And that's what those dreams also do, right? If you really look at it, it allows you to feel loved, and it allows you to sit in the mystery a little bit more too. And so the more we understand this, the more we understand what is going on, because there is a mystery here too. And I think it connects a lot too with these end-of-life dreams and visions that people have. And I think that's where I think the beauty is. We can separate them a little bit more easily after loss, right? For someone who's not at end of life. But at end of life, they kind of mesh together. And that's what Dr. Kerr, and I think you were saying too, just that, because the sleep is so sporadic, people don't know if they're sleeping or if they're awake when they have these visions. And so when you go back in time, you can start seeing that they are distinct, right? Some people are having dreams, and dreams aren't related to the different types of continuing bonds and how they're factored out, which is, I think, interesting itself. But you can sort of see they're two distinct things. But then at end of life, they become almost one. But they both have the same kind of effect, that they're trying to help the individual with processing whatever they're processing. And I think that's sort of the main story, and that they tend to be positive and very loving. And I think, there is something there as we move forward that, to look at a little bit more. And maybe those people who don't dream of the deceased, maybe they're the ones are having more of these externalizing visions, like you were saying, right? You didn't have one of your mom, but then you had this moment in time where you felt that she was there. And then you start having these dreams afterwards. And then you wonder if they're connected in some way, because the experience isn't uncommon. And so you just I'm really curious in how it interacts, and how dreams maybe help push some of those experiences. It's just, you don't know, but it's just something that needs to be normalized a little bit more. And I'm glad I was able to do some research on that.
Well, and bridging over to Dr. Kerr again, he talks about dreams that people have that are sort of more in the unconscious, organic, and processing, and distinguishes deathbed visions and dreams having a more of a real quality about them, and a different impact, which I've seen sort of coming up in the theme of your research too. Yeah. So children, you have I got your two little books.
Oh, you do?
remembering Al and dreaming of Al. Aw. So tell me about children.
So a lot of people forget about children when it comes
And they're
to.
amazing.
They are amazing. Yes,
They're
children are
open
great.
little beings.
Children are great in many ways, and I think when we're talking about how just the population doesn't understand the value of dreams, and like we're trying to educate adults, well, the adults aren't telling the children or even inquiring on children what are they dreaming about, and they're going to have nightmares. They're going to have dreams of deceased, and the way they process it is kind of more unique to them because they're more open into the possibilities of life. And so, it's really good to ask children about their dreams because one study that was done after child loss, or no, after a parent died and their children around the age of 11, 55% of them had a dream of the deceased parent. And so that's a lot of people. And I don't know if we mentioned, so after just in adults, when we talk about frequency, after spousal loss, it was 86% within the first year or two. After pet loss, it was 78% within the first 6 months. They had a dream of the deceased. And then after prenatal loss, it was around 58%. So you start seeing that really most people will have these experiences. And the longer you go in time, you're probably going to have a higher frequency as you move forward because people have more time to remember one of those types of dreams. But children have these experiences, and they can really be harmful to them if they don't understand dreams, like especially if it's a negative dream that's providing them guilt in some way. And just by asking it, they'll share. Like a lot of people are very open, and children are like that too. And just understanding that you need the confidence, just ask the question and say, "Oh, have you dreamt of so and so after the loss?" Right. And they may say yes, and they may say no. But a lot of these dreams can be just as fulfilling and positive and very loving for children. And what they get is a little bit different than what you would get. Because a lot of times, let's say if I saw a couple of dreams where the child had a dream of just walking to school with the dad, and he felt that the dad was still part of the family, and so it was this continuing bond experience where he felt that it was, you could say it was a visitation in some way. And other times there was like a child, I remember saying her friend died and she had a dream of her deceased friend. And she asked her friend, are you okay? And then she said yes. And then she asked, are you making new friends? Like that was her thing. Like I've never seen an adult ask the deceased if they're making new friends. It's usually about them in many ways. Like, what can you give me?
Right.
What kind of answers can you give me? But for the beauty of a child's mind is that
they're so
open, and they cared so much about that soul or that person that they wanted to know if they're making new friends, if they're having a good time, because that's what a good time means to that person. And so you can sort of really see that going on. And so, but when we look at this topic, one thing I should mention, there was a negative dream that I've seen it in children's dreams, but also in adult dreams. And it's a dream where the deceased is trying to convince the person to leave this life, is the best way to put it. So it's a theme called like Come Join Me. And in my research, it was found to be related to high forms of trauma symptoms. And so other people who have looked at the topic, there's this counselor, Patricia Garfield, who did a lot of work with dreams. And she mentioned that this type of thing, she noticed when she counseled people, that it was related to high suicide ideation and also depression. And so kids are also having these experiences. So what I want to point out is that if a child thinks that the deceased is real, or even adults too, they think it's a visitation, they may actually do that thinking that the soul is asking them to take their life. And so this is why it's like very important, because we can understand where the person is maybe mentally and it comes to their grief, and to really change perspective on if that's what they think. Because if it's tied to trauma and let's say suicide ideation, well, it's more representative of what you're going through rather than the deceased is alive and trying to get you to die. And it's like, we got to be able to ask the question so we can help those people, because they may seem good on the outside. And, people are really great at faking, sort of that image, but the dreams tell the truth. And that's why it's, I think, very important to ask everyone about the dreams that they're having, because it'd be very important to helping them find a new way of living.
Well, and that's a fact. I was just thinking about after a friend committed suicide. It was a very tragic death. And I talk about the dream after in my book. I hesitated for years to say it was a suicide
Mm.
because it was so lucid and so beautiful. It was like a near death experience. In fact, in your podcast, I think you put music in behind it because there were so many details. But it was so beautiful, like so healing. But at one point in the dream, I look at her and I say, do you want me to come and be with you? And she goes, no,
Right, right.
no. She said, you will be with me one day, but not now. And
Mm.
so I woke up from that, receiving the gift of that, but also knowing that my life is here. It's quite profound when I think of what you say. It was a clear no, you
Yeah.
stay. Yes, this is beautiful and my love is here, but not now. You have other things to do, right? So,
And what a dream you had. And I think it's beautiful because I think it shows that these dreams can really help us by telling us no. But there's some dreams that say yes. And so, just understanding that no, like that's why we need to ask about these dreams. But it's so beautiful you had a dream like that to say, no, no, no. You got to stay there. You're okay. You're going to work through this and we'll be
yeah, because
together
it's
one day. Yeah.
the other is a red flag for the person's
That's
own
right.
psychological health and well-being. Well,
Mm-hmm.
and like you, that dream, the grief in that was so intense. And at the end of that dream, I woke up and I could not move. Like my whole being had changed. The grief was lifted in a way that I can't even describe. And it sent, like you, it sent me in a whole different direction. But no grief counselor could have done what that dream did. So, like you, I've experienced that. So, why do we not acknowledge the depth and beauty of the gifts of these when they
Right.
come, right?
Well, it's just what I said.
Yeah.
Like, it's not just the interpretation. Like, you were changed because of the experience. So there's something going on in that experience is that changing people, like you and me, but tons of thousands of other people are being changed within their sleep. And like, we should want to know more about that because there'd be a lot of clues on how we can help people as they work through their grief and waking life, but also about the body and what's going on because there seems to be some sort of aspect of it that it's being able to heal itself, without an external presence. And what's going on there? Because not everyone gets that. So if we know, maybe there's clues to allowing us to be able to be in that space. And what I see in the common factor of all of it is that there's this presence of love that's so profound. And I think that there may be something about that, about how it can heal, like how love actually maybe is the most powerful medicine, for an individual. But it's like, how does a body get there? Is it because of an actual loving being that's actually there? Or is it because there's a part of within us that can get to that state within our own bodies, and then it populates the imagery? Like you just don't know, but something is going on, which is very mysterious, but it allows you to see, okay, a little bit more of, what is love? And how do we maintain that? And I always like to say too, for me, if we can have it in a dream, why can't we have it in waking life?
Exactly.
And
it flows over into life, right?
Yeah.
And I love the way you said your dream brought the color back into my life. I mean, that aesthetically, that's beautiful. The rainbow's back again instead of the dim light, right? So, and just touching, because you talked, it's so lovely, Josh. I just love how you're celebrating this. But you touched on tribal cultures and spiritual traditions in history. And I talked to Dr. Kerr about this too. In history, they acknowledge dreams and still do profoundly for their wisdom, right? So learning from that too, why not reincorporate the wisdom that sometimes has been lost,
I think what it is,
time.
I think, what I do isn't new. Like people have been dreaming since the beginning of time and been dreaming about the deceased. And you can see it in a lot of other cultures. I think what the difference is that no one's really studied it. And so once you study it, you can normalize it because people need that. But with the research, you can then look at other cultures and the different forms of how they see those dreams and compare it to what the research is saying to understand it a little bit more. Like that one culture who says, if you have a deceased, the deceased is trying to convince you, it means you're going to die soon. Well, what's actually going on there? Because they don't have the research tools when they made the theory. They just realized there's a common link there. And so what actually is going on? Oh, it's probably trauma. Oh, okay, interesting. But you also realize too that in any kind of culture, there's varying beliefs about these dreams. I think that is what's interesting. There's no real clear-cut thing because there's a lot of different theories on how people see these dreams. And it's about changing people's perspectives and educating them enough to be able to use discernment. I think that's the most important thing. I think it's very important to understand that there's a mix in any kind of culture, any kind of religion on how they view these dreams. Even Christianity, I've heard I've heard a lot of pastors in many different directions. Some people say they don't know. Other people say, yes, the deceased could contact you. Other people say, no, it's a devil in disguise. And so you got to understand that all these theories are being out there. And the reason why, because no one ever had the answer. There's never any research to help anyone through this. It's not in their books in many ways or the religious texts. And so trying to use discernment with the variety of dreams is something that I hope the research actually helps moving forward, because I said, like, someone can get stuck in one dream, like they'll say it's a visitation, and they classify all dreams as visitation, rather than saying, no, we got to use discernment when we use that label. Because now I think the research is showing the vast amount of different types of dreams people can have with the deceased present. They never really had that before. So, so now it's giving us a way to talk about it in a new way.
And so on the positive element and beauty of the research, are you finding by acknowledging these grief dreams that helps in the overall arc of the grief journey and healing?
I get so many people like emailing me just saying like how important the work is for them, because I said like they didn't have anyone around and they felt that they were going crazy in a way because they're having these experiences. And then when they realize it's actually a thing, they actually are really grateful that that burden is now off their shoulders and they can enjoy the experience. And I think that's what it is, can you provide a safe space for people to enjoy these experiences when they do have them, especially those positive ones, and we don't diminish the value of what it is to that person. And so, I definitely see it changing, and it's funny what research does, right? Like, cause I could share my experience with the world, but no one cares. You add some studies to it, all of a sudden it's like a thing, and people say, look, it exists. And you're like, but this is the world we live in. So I'm just glad I did, a little bit of, quantitative stuff, which is, what people really look for, but also some of the qualitative by embedding some of these dreams so people can actually see what they look like in the research.
So how to come to the end of this beautiful conversation and such an important conversation? How has your heart been changed by this work?
I would say it allowed me to understand the power of love. I had my own dream, but I get so much wisdom from these dreams, and people don't even understand. Like, I am in such a privileged position to see thousands of these dreams, and most of them are positive, and most of them have a lot of insights for people as they move forward. And for me, I sometimes I cry because it's just so beautiful and they're so life-changing for that person. And I'm like, wow, it makes me understand that there is a goal I'm trying to reach even in my own life, and it's to be able to be that state of love in waking life. Because you start seeing it and you start realizing, wow, there's just a little more work I need to do. There's a little more thing I need to do to get there. But it's so inspiring. People have it. I remember the one dream was a person had, and it was her grandfather telling her, even in sadness, there is beauty. And like, I sit with that sometimes, like when I'm going through a hard time. It's just like understanding, like, wait a sec, like this is telling me something about me. And there's beauty in learning about yourself and what your goals are, what your dreams are, what you love, that sometimes we take for granted. And, you can see that there's the power of that. And for me, like, that's the biggest thing of it all, is just the power of love in the grief journey and what it can really do for us.
Well, that's beautiful, Josh. And a lovely note to end on as well. So I thank you for coming on today. And I want everyone to know griefdreams.com, right?
No. .ca.
Oh, sorry, Canada.
I'm Canadian.
We're Canadian. Barb, what are you doing? Sorry. Griefdreams.ca. No one will forget that now. So griefdreams.ca and the Grief Dream podcast. And also too, in some of your other interviews, they haven't talked about the children's books, Remembering Al and Dreaming of Al. And those are lovely little books that you can sit with children and adults actually, and open the conversation. So not to forget those. So griefdreams.ca. And thank you again. It's lovely to know you, and I've been able to support you in this exploration because it's helping so many people. And I really appreciate you coming on. And you're in Vancouver, so we're going to have a coffee soon too. So anyway, thank you again, Josh. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me on and having a platform, and you doing what you're doing, because you're just raising awareness on a topic that people are longing to know more about. So, kudos to you too for just being you, and, having the courage to start something new. And I'm really happy where your life is heading too, because even after it said, I'm pretty sure you retired from your hospice job, and then you're doing something else that is actually influencing where people can find, the research and find, answers that they're looking for. And so, I want to thank you too for what you do.
Thanks, Josh. Wonderful. Okay. Take care.
Bye.